The red emergency light pulsed across the coalition chambers like a dying heartbeat. Ruth Sterling watched alien delegates file into their seats with the slow, measured movements of beings who had seen too many crises to rush anymore. Some floated, in containment fields filled with methane. Others skittered on multiple legs across specially designed platforms. The ethereal collective appeared as shimmering energy patterns that hurt human eyes to look at directly. Ruth adjusted her simple, black suit and checked her notes one final time. 23 years as Earth's ambassador had taught her that the most important decisions often began with the most ordinary-looking meetings. Today felt different, though. The plague reports from the Kethmoran system had been flooding in for weeks, each one worse than the last. The Althurian speaker called the session to order with a harmonious chime that resonated through the chamber's translation matrix. Its crystalline form caught the light as it began the ritual opening words. We gather in wisdom to preserve the balance of all things. The matter before us requires swift resolution. Ruth knew what that meant. In coalition speak, swift resolution usually meant doing nothing while calling it something noble. The holographic display materialized above the chamber floor, showing the Kethmoran system in clinical detail. 3 worlds orbited a yellow star, each one marked with red warning symbols. The Villani had been a proud species, she remembered from the cultural files. Bear-like but graceful, with clever hands and minds that created the most beautiful sculptures in known space. They had been on the verge of applying for coalition membership when the plague struck. The biological agent shows remarkable specificity, reported the Nexari delegate through its mechanical translator. The silicon-based being's voice sounded like grinding stone. It targets only mature Villani neural systems. Juvenile subjects show complete immunity. Ruth felt her stomach tighten. She had read the reports, but hearing it stated so coldly made it real in a way that data never could. An entire civilization's adults were dying, leaving their children behind. The ethereal representative's voice whispered directly into every mind present. We have confirmed approximately 180,000 juvenile survivors across the 3 worlds. Without adult guidance, survival estimates suggest complete population collapse within 8 months. 8 months. Ruth stared at the hologram, showing Villani settlements where the lights were going out one by one. In each of those dark buildings, cubs were learning what it meant to be alone. The question before us is clear, announced the Althurian speaker. Do we risk contamination by intervening, or do we maintain quarantine protocols to protect coalition space? The debate that followed felt like watching a trial where the verdict had already been decided. The Dominion representative spoke of the greater good and acceptable losses. The crystalline builders worried about precedent and resource allocation. Even species that Ruth had considered allies found reasons to avoid action. The plague could mutate, warned the Aquatic League delegate. Intervention risks spreading it to other systems. We lack the cultural knowledge to properly raise their young, added the Hive Queen. Improper development could create psychological damage worse than natural death. Ruth listened to each argument and felt something cold settle in her chest. These were the same beings who had spent decades lecturing humans about the importance of wisdom and cosmic perspective. Now they were finding sophisticated ways to let children die. The Nexari delegate's mechanical voice cut through the discussion. The natural order sometimes requires difficult choices. Species rise and fall according to cosmic will. This is the way of things. Natural order. Ruth had heard those words before, usually from beings who benefited from keeping things exactly as they were. When her turn came to speak, Ruth stood slowly. The chamber fell silent as hundreds of alien eyes, sensors, and consciousness fields focused on her. Humans were still considered the newcomers here, barely 2 centuries in space while some coalition members had been exploring stars for millennia. The human delegation has reviewed all available data, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation matrix. We understand the risks. We acknowledge the challenges. We respect the wisdom of our colleagues. Ruth paused, looking around the chamber at beings who had stopped aging before her species learned to make fire. However, we cannot support allowing children to die when intervention is possible. Earth casts its vote for immediate humanitarian assistance to the Villani cubs. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to collapse stars. Then the Althurian speaker's voice rang out with something that might have been surprise. The human position is noted. Are there any other dissenting votes? Ruth waited, hoping that someone, anyone, would join them. The ethereal collective's energy patterns flickered with what she had learned to recognize as internal debate. The Aquatic League delegates' gills fluttered rapidly. For a moment, she thought the builders might speak up, but one by one, they all confirmed their original positions. Let the cubs die. Call it natural order. Call it cosmic balance. Call it anything except what it really was. The motion carries by overwhelming majority, the speaker announced. Quarantine protocols will remain in effect. The Kethmaran system is declared off-limits to all coalition vessels pending biological assessment. Ruth felt the weight of those words settle on her shoulders. Around the chamber, delegates were already moving on to the next agenda item, something about trade route optimization. The Villani cubs had become yesterday's business in the span of a vote. But as the speaker called for the next matter, Ruth remained standing. Ambassador Sterling, the speaker said with barely concealed irritation, the matter has been decided. I understand, Ruth replied, her voice steady. I wish to make a statement for the record. The chamber stilled again. Even routine coalition business stopped for formal statements. Ruth looked directly at the holographic display still showing the Kethmaran system. Somewhere in that distant star system, cubs were crying for parents who would never come home. The human delegation acknowledges the coalition's decision. We understand that intervention is forbidden under current protocols. Earth will comply with all coalition laws regarding member species obligations. She paused, and in that pause, every being in the chamber seemed to lean forward slightly. However, the coalition charter grants each member species sovereignty over their own vessels and citizens in non-coalition space. Therefore, while we respect this body's decision, humanity reserves the right to conduct independent operations outside coalition jurisdiction. The explosion of voices, chimes, and electromagnetic protests that erupted almost overwhelmed the translation matrix. Ruth had just announced that humans were going to ignore the spirit of the decision, while technically following its letter. The Dominion delegate's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Ambassador Sterling, such action would be viewed most unfavorably by this body. Ruth met what passed for the being's gaze without flinching. Noted and understood. But Earth's position remains unchanged. Children should not die alone. As Ruth gathered her materials and prepared to leave, she heard the ethereal collective whisper something that bypassed the translation matrix entirely, speaking directly to her human mind. Perhaps there is another way to measure wisdom. Ruth didn't reply, but she filed those words away as she walked out of the chamber. Behind her, the debate raged on about precedent and proper procedure, and the importance of following established protocols. Within hours, every human ship in coalition space received the same coded message. Operation Cubs Dawn is authorized. All volunteers report to staging areas immediately. Ruth stood in her office afterward, looking out at the stars through the massive viewing port. Somewhere out there, Villani cubs were learning what abandonment felt like. But not for much longer. She activated her personal communicator and sent a message to Earth. Tell them we're coming. Tell them someone still believes that children matter more than politics. The message would take 3 days to reach the Kethmaran system. Ruth just hoped the cubs could wait that long. In the depths of space, human ships began changing course, converging on coordinates that officially didn't exist on any coalition star chart. The galaxy was about to learn something new about the species that had once been afraid of the dark. The Global Council chambers buzzed with activity as representatives from every human nation gathered around the massive holographic display. Earth's legal experts had been working for 72 hours straight, dissecting every line of coalition law while the clock ticked toward disaster in the Kethmaran system. Dr. David Kim pushed his glasses up his nose and highlighted another section of the legal code. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed the sleepless nights he had spent searching for any possible way to help the Vellani cubs without starting an interstellar war. "Here's what we found," he said, his voice hoarse but determined. Coalition Statute 4.7 clearly forbids interference with developing civilizations. But look at subsection 12. The text appeared in glowing letters above the table. The statute applies only to existing governmental or social structures of member or protected species. President Chen leaned forward in her chair, studying the words carefully. "What exactly does that mean for us?" "It means," Kim said with the first smile he had worn in days, "that we can't interfere with the Vellani civilization, but there is no Vellani civilization anymore. The plague wiped out every adult. No government, no social structure, no civilization to interfere with." The room went quiet as the implications sank in. General Adams was the first to speak. "You're saying the Cubs don't technically count as a civilization under coalition law?" "Exactly. They're survivors of an extinct species. Coalition law has no provisions for that situation, because it never occurred to anyone that an entire adult population could vanish while leaving the young behind." Ruth Sterling joined the meeting by quantum link from Coalition headquarters, her image flickering slightly due to the distance. "The legal analysis is sound, but we need to be realistic about consequences. The Coalition won't appreciate creative interpretations of their laws." President Chen stood and walked to the viewing wall, where Earth rotated slowly beneath them. Lights from cities sparkled like stars, each one representing millions of humans going about their daily lives, unaware that their species was about to make a decision that would echo through history. "What kind of resources would we need?" she asked quietly. Admiral Foster spread his hands across the tactical display, and ship icons began appearing throughout human space. "We can mobilize the entire humanitarian fleet within 2 weeks. Hospital ships, colony vessels, agricultural platforms, educational ships. The works." "How many people are we talking about saving?" asked Dr. Lisa Ward from the Xenobiology Institute. "Current estimates suggest 180,000 cubs spread across 3 planets," Kim replied. "Ages ranging from what would be equivalent to human toddlers up to teenagers. All of them will be dead within 8 months without intervention." The number hung in the air like a physical weight. 180,000 children facing death by starvation and neglect, while the galaxy's most advanced civilizations debated protocols. "The logistical challenges are enormous," Admiral Foster admitted. "We're talking about the largest rescue operation in human history. We'll need volunteers from every field. Medical teams, teachers, engineers, child psychologists, xenobiologists. And that's just the start." Dr. Ward pulled up biological data on her tablet. "We know almost nothing about Vellani child development, their nutritional needs, their social requirements. We'll be learning everything from scratch while trying to keep them alive." "What about the other coalition species?" asked Representative Johnson from the African Union. "Are any of them willing to help quietly?" Ruth shook her head on the screen. "I've made discreet inquiries. Most are genuinely afraid of the plague, but some are just using it as an excuse. The ethereal collective seemed conflicted, but they won't act without consensus. The builders are interested in Vellani engineering, but not enough to risk political fallout." President Chen turned back to face the room. "So we're alone in this." "We've been alone before," Admiral Foster said simply. "Didn't stop us from doing what needed doing." The debate that followed would be remembered as one of humanity's defining moments, though the participants didn't know it at the time. They discussed resource allocation, volunteer recruitment, technological challenges, and political consequences. They talked about the economic impact of potential coalition sanctions and the risk of losing access to advanced alien technologies. What they didn't debate was whether they should act. That question had been answered the moment Ruth Sterling cast humanity's vote in the coalition chambers. "The Cubs have unique physiology," Dr. Ward explained, reviewing the biological data they had managed to gather. "Their neural development continues for years after birth. They need constant mental stimulation and emotional support, or their intelligence actually decreases. They're not just physically vulnerable without adults. They'll lose what makes them who they are." The implications of that statement settled over the room like a shroud. The Villani cubs weren't just facing death. They were facing the loss of everything their species had ever been. President Chen called for a formal vote at 0300 Earth Standard Time. The result was unanimous, though several representatives openly wept as they cast their ballots. Within hours, recruitment centers opened in every major human city. The response was overwhelming. Teachers requested transfers to alien worlds they had never seen. Doctors volunteered for missions that might last decades. Engineers abandoned lucrative private sector jobs to design habitats for bear-like children who spoke in musical tones. Anne Brooks received her orders while reviewing cargo manifests in the Luna orbital shipyards. The UES Resilience had been designed as a colony ship, built to carry 10,000 humans to new worlds. Now it would carry supplies and volunteers to a dying system where alien children waited for salvation that might never come. "How long do we have?" she asked Admiral Foster during their final briefing. 6 months before the cubs start dying in significant numbers. 8 months before we lose them all. Anne nodded grimly. The Resilience was fast for a ship of its size, but it would take 3 weeks just to reach the Kethmoran system. That left them 5 months to save an entire species' children. "What if we fail?" asked Dr. Patel, the mission's chief xenopsychologist. She was young for such a responsibility, but she had spent years studying interspecies communication. Admiral Foster looked out at the stars visible through the shipyard's massive windows. "Then we fail trying, but we don't fail by not trying." Though final preparations took on an urgency that infected everyone involved. Human manufacturers worked around the clock to produce medical equipment that might work on alien physiology. Linguists developed new translation protocols based on fragmentary recordings of Villani speech. Child development experts studied every piece of available data about how young Villani learned and grew. Most importantly, they prepared for the emotional reality of what they were attempting. These cubs had watched their parents die. They had been alone for months already. Some might be too traumatized to trust any adult, even those trying to help them. Dr. Patel spent her final days on Earth consulting with child trauma specialists and veterinarians who worked with orphaned bear cubs. The combination felt absurd, until she realized that the Villani cubs would need both types of care. 3 days before departure, Ruth Sterling sent her final message to the coalition. It was brief and formal, informing them that human vessels would be conducting independent humanitarian operations in uncharted space. She didn't mention their destination. The coalition's response came within hours, a formal warning about the consequences of unsanctioned operations in sensitive regions, a reminder about the importance of following established protocols, a thinly veiled threat about reviewing Earth's membership status. Ruth deleted the message without forwarding it to Earth. Some things were more important than politics. Anne Brooks stood on the Resilience's observation deck as Earth fell away behind them. 12 ships had joined the mission, carrying everything from medical equipment to playground materials. 20,000 human volunteers were aboard those vessels, leaving behind families and careers for a mission that might cost them everything. "Second, thoughts?" asked Dr. Patel, joining Anne at the viewing port. "About the mission?" "Never." Anne watched the stars grow brighter as they left Earth's atmosphere behind. "About whether we can actually pull this off?" Constantly, the ship's communication officer, Lieutenant Rivers, approached with a tablet in hand. "Captain, we're receiving messages from human colonies throughout the galaxy. Support packages, volunteer requests, resource donations. It seems word is spreading." Anne scrolled through the messages and felt something warm bloom in her chest despite the cold of space around them. Colony ships changing course to join them. Research stations sending their entire stockpiles of medical supplies. Individual humans volunteering their life savings to fund the mission. "How many ships are we up to now?" she asked. 47, and counting, Rivers replied. "The Geneva is bringing agricultural specialists. The New Horizon has a full educational team. 3 hospital ships from the Mars Medical Coalition just launched." Dr. Patel shook her head in amazement. "We're talking about the largest humanitarian fleet in human history, and we organized it in less than a week. That's what happens when children are in danger, Anne said simply. Humans don't do committees when kids are dying. The journey to Kethmaran would take 3 weeks. During that time, the volunteers studied everything they could about Velani: biology, psychology, and culture. They practiced emergency medical procedures on alien physiologies they had never seen. They learned to pronounce Velani names and memorized the few songs that had been recorded before the plague struck. Most importantly, they prepared themselves emotionally for what they would find. An entire species of children, alone and afraid, waiting for help that most of the galaxy had decided was too inconvenient to provide. On the final night before arrival, Anne found herself in the ship's small chapel, which had been modified to accommodate multiple human faiths and philosophies. She wasn't particularly religious, but something about the mission felt larger than any individual decision. Dr. Patel was already there, sitting quietly in one of the simple wooden pews that reminded everyone of home. Nervous? Anne asked, sitting beside her. Terrified, Patel admitted. What if we can't communicate with them? What if they're too traumatized to trust us? What if we make everything worse? Anne considered the questions seriously. They were all valid concerns that had kept her awake for most of the journey. Then we try again, she said finally. And if that doesn't work, we try something else. But we don't stop trying. The coalition delegates were right about one thing, Patel said. We really don't know how to raise Velani cubs. We're making this up as we go. Maybe that's what they need, Anne replied. Everyone else was so worried about doing it right that they decided not to do it at all. Sometimes the wrong action is better than the right inaction. The ship's intercom crackled to life. All hands, this is the bridge. We'll be dropping out of hyperspace in 6 hours. Final preparations should be completed within 4 hours. Anne stood and straightened her uniform. In 6 hours, they would discover whether human compassion was enough to bridge the gap between species, whether love could overcome the practical considerations that had convinced the rest of the galaxy to let the cubs die. As she left the chapel, Anne whispered a promise to the stars ahead of them. We're coming. Hold on just a little longer. The first thing Anne noticed when they dropped out of hyperspace was the silence. The Kethmaran system's communication networks, which should have been buzzing with traffic from a thriving civilization, broadcast nothing but automated distress beacons that had been repeating the same message for months. Dr. Patel stood beside her on the bridge, watching the 3 planets appear on the main display. Even from space, they could see the changes. City lights that should have formed bright clusters were scattered and dim, like dying embers. Agricultural regions showed the geometric patterns of abandoned farms slowly being reclaimed by wilderness. Scanning for life signs, reported the sensor operator, a young man named Torres whose hands shook slightly as he worked the controls. Confirmed biological activity on all 3 worlds, detecting approximately 178,000 individual Velani signatures. Anne felt relief and dread in equal measure. They had lost some cubs already, but most had survived the journey. Now came the hard part. Take us to the primary world first, she ordered. Launch reconnaissance drones and prepare the first contact. Teams. The planet below looked like Earth might have looked after a gentle apocalypse. Velani cities were built in harmony with their natural environment, growing from the landscape rather than imposing upon it. But without maintenance, the organic architecture was already beginning to merge back into the forests and plains that surrounded it. The drones transmitted their first images an hour later. Anne found herself staring at scenes that would haunt her dreams for years to come. Cubs wandered through empty streets, some in small groups, others completely alone. They were clearly intelligent, attempting to maintain their communities and find food, but they were losing the battle against entropy and despair. Dr. Patel enhanced one image that showed a group of cubs trying to operate what looked like a food distribution center. They were too small to reach the controls properly, and their attempts to help each other were both heartbreaking and inspiring. They're trying so hard, Patel whispered. Look at how they're cooperating, even under these conditions. Anne nodded, studying the cubs' behavior. They're not just surviving. They're trying to preserve their society. We need to work with that, not replace it. The first landing parties touched down in a city that the translation computers called Harmony of Growing Things. The name felt like a knife in Anne's heart as she surveyed the dying community that had once lived up to its title. The cubs' first reaction to seeing humans was pure terror. They scattered like startled deer hiding in buildings and underbrush. These children had never seen aliens before, and humans must have looked like monsters from their worst nightmares. Dr. Patel had prepared for this reaction. Instead of pursuing the frightened cubs, the humans set up their equipment in the city's central plaza and began a careful ritual of demonstration. They prepared food, tended to plants, and performed maintenance on broken infrastructure, all while singing softly and moving slowly. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. 8-year-old Emma Chen, daughter of one of the mission's engineers, had insisted on joining the mission despite the dangers. She appeared in the plaza with a small musical instrument and began playing simple melodies while building structures with colorful blocks. The first cub to approach was barely the size of a human toddler, but its eyes showed the intelligence of a much older child. It watched Emma for nearly an hour before creeping close enough to touch one of the blocks. Emma smiled and offered the block to the cub without looking directly at it, a technique Dr. Patel had learned from animal behaviorists. The cub took the block with small, careful hands that trembled with fear and curiosity. Within days, that first contact had rippled throughout the cub population. The young Velani proved remarkably adaptable, especially when they realized the humans were there to help rather than harm. They began teaching humans their language through games and songs, while learning human words with the quick absorption that only children possess. The human volunteers found themselves challenged in ways they had never expected. Velani cubs matured differently than human children, developing complex reasoning skills before their physical coordination caught up. They asked questions that required deep philosophical thinking and created art that moved human observers to tears. Medical officer Dr. Rachel Green made the first major breakthrough in understanding Velani physiology when she realized their nutritional needs changed based on emotional state. Cubs who were happy and engaged could process a wide variety of foods, while traumatized cubs could literally starve even when given adequate calories. They're not just intelligent, Green reported during the daily briefing. Their biology is tied to their emotional and social well-being in ways we're still discovering. The cubs who've bonded with human caretakers are showing dramatic improvements in health and development. Anne walked through the temporary human settlement as evening approached on the alien world. Around her, humans and cubs worked together on dozens of projects. A group of engineering volunteers was teaching cubs to repair the city's water systems, while the cubs showed humans how to cultivate the local plants that form the basis of their diet. The sight that stopped her was a young cub, perhaps 6 in human years, sitting with elderly Professor Martinez as they worked on mathematical problems together. The cub was solving equations that would challenge a human university student, while Martinez helped with the fine motor control needed to write the symbols properly. "How is this possible?" Anne asked Dr. Patel later that evening. "Near as we can tell, Velani intelligence develops in waves. They get cognitive abilities early, but need years to develop the wisdom and emotional regulation to use them properly. That's why they need adults for so long." Patel paused, reviewing her notes. "The really remarkable thing is how quickly they're adapting to human caretakers. It's like they instinctively recognize nurturing behavior regardless of species." The rescue operation expanded rapidly as more human ships arrived and the cubs grew comfortable with their new caregivers. Entire city blocks were restored to functionality through combined human-Velani effort. Food production systems came back online. Most importantly, the cubs began to laugh again. But the mission faced constant challenges that no amount of preparation could have anticipated. Cubs who had been alone for months showed signs of trauma that required careful patient healing. Cultural misunderstandings led to conflicts that threatened fragile bonds. Some cubs had developed survival behaviors that made them resistant to accepting help. The breakthrough that changed everything came when the cubs began creating art together with their human caregivers. Velani artistic expression combined visual beauty with mathematical precision in ways that human artists had never imagined. When humans contributed their own creative traditions, the resulting collaborative works were extraordinary enough to leave both species changed. "They're not just surviving," Anne reported to Earth during her weekly update. "They're becoming something new. Still Vellani, but influenced by human culture in ways that are creating entirely new forms of expression and thought." The first major crisis came when a group of older cubs, equivalent to human teenagers, attempted to return to their traditional community structures without human supervision. They had the intelligence to manage many adult tasks, but lacked the emotional maturity to handle the isolation and responsibility. Dr. Patel spent 3 days in careful negotiation with the group, finally reaching a compromise that established mixed human Vellani family units. Cubs would maintain their cultural identity and traditional learning, but within a support structure that included human adults who could provide the emotional stability they needed. "We're not trying to make them human," Patel explained to a concerned volunteer who worried about cultural contamination. "We're trying to give them the foundation they need to become fully Vellani. Sometimes that means learning from both species." As the months passed, the rescue operation evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history. Human volunteers found themselves changed by the experience of caring for alien children who saw the universe through completely different eyes. Cubs who had been dying alone were growing into individuals who combined Vellani creativity with human resilience. The transformation was visible even from space. The 3 worlds began showing new patterns of light as communities came back to life. Agricultural regions bloomed with hybrid crops that fed both human and Vellani nutritional needs. Communication networks carried the laughter of children speaking in 2 languages and creating new words that belonged to neither. But even as the rescue succeeded beyond all expectations, Anne knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy was watching, and not all observers were pleased with humanity's interpretation of coalition law. Storm clouds were gathering among the stars, and the cubs they had saved might soon face dangers that made plague and starvation look simple by comparison. Standing in the observation lounge of the Resilience, Anne watched Vellani cubs play with human children in the settlement below. Their games were becoming something entirely new, neither fully human nor fully Vellani, but beautiful in its hybrid nature. "What have we started?" she wondered aloud. Dr. Patel, who had been observing the same scene, answered without hesitation. Something the galaxy wasn't ready for, and something it desperately needed. The Nexari observation ship held position at the edge of the Kethmaran system, its sensors focused on the impossible scene playing out on the 3 worlds below. Technical analyst Prime 67 processed the incoming data with the cold precision that had made its species the galaxy's premier information gatherers. The humans had been on the planets for 8 months now. According to every predictive model the Nexari possessed, the rescue should have failed catastrophically by month 3. Alien children could not be successfully raised by incompatible species. The biological, psychological, and cultural barriers were insurmountable, yet the data told a different story entirely. 67 adjusted its sensory array to focus on the primary settlement. The cubs were not merely surviving, they were thriving in ways that defied everything the coalition understood about interspecies development. Vellani youngsters were learning human languages while teaching their own to their caregivers. They were creating hybrid technologies that combined human engineering with Vellani artistic sensibilities. Most disturbing of all, they appeared to be happy. "Transmit the daily report to Coalition Command," 67 instructed its communication. Drone. The reports had grown longer each day as the impossible success continued to unfold. 3 systems away, Coalition Command received the transmission with growing alarm. What had begun as a monitoring mission to document human failure was becoming something far more dangerous to the established order. Dominion war speaker Karath studied the reports with the calculating mind that had made its species the Coalition's primary military force. The Dominion ruled through strength and the careful application of fear. They had spent centuries teaching younger species that survival required following Dominion leadership. Now the humans were demonstrating that compassion could achieve what Superior firepower and advanced technology could not. How many coalition worlds are receiving these reports? Kareth asked its intelligence coordinator. All of them, War Speaker. The Nexari data is transmitted on open channels per coalition transparency protocols. Kareth's multiple eyes focused on the holographic display showing human ships throughout the Kethmaran system. Each vessel represented a threat to everything the Dominion had built, not a military threat which could be handled with conventional responses. This was something far more dangerous. The humans were providing an alternative to the Coalition's way of doing things. On the world of crystal singing, the ethereal collective's governing consciousness wrestled with concepts it had not confronted in millennia. The humans' actions had awakened something in the collective's shared mind, a memory of when they too had been young and had believed that right action mattered more than political convenience. Individual ethereal voices began separating from the unified consensus, each one arguing for different responses to the human intervention. Some wanted to condemn the violation of coalition protocols. Others suggested quiet support. A growing minority proposed that the collective had been wrong to abandon the cubs in the first place. The debate raged through their crystalline cities, like a storm of pure thought, threatening to shatter the unity that had defined their species for eons. Meanwhile, on dozens of coalition worlds, younger species watched the human rescue with growing interest. The Aquatic League's junior delegates began asking uncomfortable questions about their government's vote. Builder apprentices calculated the resources that could have been allocated to help the cubs. Even within the Nexari's rigid hierarchy, lower-ranked analysts began submitting reports that questioned the wisdom of the quarantine decision. The pressure reached its breaking point when the cubs made their first major technological breakthrough, working with human engineers. A group of teenage Vellani developed a new type of power generation system that combined human fusion technology with Vellani harmonic principles. The resulting devices were 40% more efficient than anything in Coalition space and produced no waste products. The schematics, transmitted on open human channels, reached every major civilization within days. War Speaker Karath convened an emergency Dominion Council as reports flooded in from their client species. The new power technology could revolutionize space travel, planetary development, and industrial production. Worlds that had been marginally habitable could become garden planets. Journey times between systems could be cut by months. And the humans were sharing it freely with anyone who supported their refugee protection initiatives. "They're using the Cubs' innovations as political weapons," snarled Karath's primary advisor. "Species that want access to the technology will have to support human humanitarian policies." "Worse than that," Karath replied, studying intelligence. "Reports from across Coalition space. They're proving that our approach is inferior. If a handful of humans can achieve better results than our entire civilizational apparatus, what does that say about Dominion leadership?" The answer to that question was becoming clear on worlds throughout the galaxy. On the Builder homeworld, construction guilds were demanding that their government formally request access to the human Vellani technological exchange program. Aquatic League member states were threatening secession if their delegates didn't reconsider the Coalition's position. Most dangerously, the ethereal collective was beginning to fracture. The crisis deepened when young beings from multiple species began volunteering for human rescue operations. Nexari technical apprentices requested transfers to human vessels. Builder engineers applied for positions in human infrastructure projects. Even some Dominion citizens, particularly those from conquered worlds, began expressing interest in joining what the humans were calling the Sanctuary Initiative. War Speaker Karath realized with growing alarm that the humans were not just saving Vellani cubs. They were creating an alternative power structure that threatened everything the Coalition represented. The formal challenge came during the Coalition's quarterly assembly. Ambassador Sterling sat in the human delegation's seats, flanked by the first adult Vellani to address the Coalition in over a year. Bright Star Over Water had been one of the older cubs when the rescue began, and in 8 months of human care, he had developed into a remarkable young adult who spoke 5 languages and had designed 3 revolutionary engineering solutions. Theo, human delegation request formal recognition of the Vellani species' restored status, Sterling announced to the stunned chamber. War Speaker Karath's response was immediate and harsh. The Velani species is extinct. You have raised alien pets, not restored a civilization. The insult rippled through the chamber like a physical blow. But it was Bright Star who responded, his voice carrying the musical quality that made Velani speech so distinctive, now enriched with the precise diction he had learned from human teachers. War Speaker Karath, with respect, I am very much alive, as are 176,000 of my people. We have not forgotten who we are, though we have learned much about who we might become. He stood slowly, his bear-like form imposing, despite his youth. The humans did not make us into pets. They gave us the chance to grow into ourselves. They shared their knowledge while learning from ours. They showed us that survival and identity are not mutually exclusive. Bright Star activated a small device, and the chamber filled with holographic displays, showing the Velani worlds as they existed now. Cities rebuilt but evolved, combining traditional architecture with human innovations. Agricultural systems that fed both species while healing the environmental damage left by the plague. Most impressive of all, schools where human and Velani children learned together, creating new forms of art, science, and philosophy. This is not extinction, Bright Star continued. This is transformation. This is what happens when species choose cooperation over abandonment. The ethereal collective's representative spoke next, its voice fragmenting as different aspects of their consciousness struggled for control. Some of us recognize the validity of these achievements. Others question the precedent being set. The collective finds itself divided on this matter. It was the first time in recorded history that an ethereal representative had admitted to internal conflict during a formal coalition session. War Speaker Karath rose to its full, intimidating height. The Dominion does not recognize any authority derived from violation of coalition protocols. These so-called achievements are the product of unlawful intervention. Any attempt to legitimize them threatens the foundation of galactic order. What order? Sterling asked quietly. The order that let children die while debating protocols? The order that values procedure over life? The order that has maintained peace for 800 years, Kareth shot back. The order that prevents chaos and ensures stability across thousands of worlds. Sterling stood and walked to the center of the chamber, where the holographic displays still showed the thriving human Velani communities. War Speaker, I've served in this body for over 2 decades. I've seen the peace you're talking about. It's the peace of the graveyard. The peace of civilizations too afraid to act, too concerned with precedent to care about consequences. She gestured to the images surrounding them. This is what happens when someone chooses to act instead of debate. When someone decides that saving lives matters more than maintaining the status quo. The chamber erupted in arguments that the translation matrix could barely process. Species that had remained silent for centuries began voicing opinions that challenged fundamental coalition assumptions. The Aquatic League demanded an immediate vote on establishing formal humanitarian intervention protocols. The builders proposed a complete review of non-interference policies. But it was the Nexari representative that provided the most shocking moment of all. Technical analyst Prime 67 had spent months documenting human failure and finding only success. Its mechanical voice cut through the chaos with a precision that demanded attention. The Nexari Collective has completed its analysis of the human intervention. Efficiency ratings exceed all coalition standards by factors ranging from 12 to 47%. Resource utilization optimal. Outcome achievement unprecedented. Conclusion. Human methodologies demonstrate superior results to established coalition protocols. The silence that followed was deafening. The Nexari had just admitted that humanity's emotional, intuitive approach was quantifiably better than the galaxy's most advanced analytical systems. War Speaker Kareth's fury was visible even through its alien features. The Dominion rejects these findings. We demand immediate cessation of all human operations in the Kethmaran system and return of the surviving subjects to their home planets for natural resolution. No, Sterling said simply. You refuse a direct Dominion order? I refuse an immoral demand. The Cubs are not subjects or property. They're people, and they get to choose their own future. Brightstar stepped forward again. My people choose to remain with our human families. We choose to continue building something new together. We choose cooperation over isolation. The vote that followed would reshape galactic politics for generations. When the coalition called for a binding resolution, demanding human withdrawal from the Kethmoran system, the result was chaos. The ethereal collective split into 3 separate factions, each voting differently. The Aquatic League voted with humanity. The Builders abstained, claiming insufficient data. Most shocking of all, 6 Dominion client species broke ranks and voted to support the human position. The resolution failed by a single vote. War Speaker Karath's response was swift and predictable. The Dominion withdraws from coalition authority on this matter. Any species supporting human intervention will face immediate economic sanctions and military review. Sterling had been expecting this moment for months. Very well. The human delegation formally announces the establishment of the Sanctuary Alliance. Membership is open to any species committed to humanitarian principles and mutual aid. The applications began arriving within hours. The Aquatic League joined immediately, followed by the Builders and 2 of the ethereal factions. More surprisingly, dozens of smaller species that had been Dominion clients for centuries requested immediate membership. Within a week, nearly 40 species had joined the Sanctuary Alliance, taking with them their trade agreements, technological exchanges, and military alliances. The coalition that had ruled the galaxy for 8 centuries was fracturing, and at the center of the break was a simple human principle: children shouldn't die alone. As the emergency session ended in chaos, Sterling found herself walking through the coalition corridors with Brightstar beside her. The young Villani carried himself with a confidence that would have been impossible before the human intervention. "What happens now?" he asked. Sterling looked out through the massive viewing ports at the stars beyond, where human and Villani ships were already planning joint missions to help other species in crisis. "Now we find out what the galaxy looks like when people choose compassion over convenience," she replied. "And we help everyone who wants to make that choice." Behind them, in the coalition chambers, War Speaker Karath was already planning humanity's punishment. But ahead of them, in the vast darkness between stars, something entirely new was being born. The galaxy was about to discover that some changes, once begun, could not be stopped. 5 years after the first human ships arrived in the Kethmoran system, the galaxy barely resembled the ordered hierarchy that had once called itself the Coalition. Trade routes that had flowed toward Dominion worlds for centuries now connected a web of Sanctuary Alliance planets, where species shared technology, resources, and hope with equal measure. Captain Anne Brooks stood on the observation deck of the UES Harmony, watching construction crews put the finishing touches on Nexus Station. The massive structure orbited between the human world of New Geneva and the Villani planet of Bright Skies, serving as the capital of an alliance that now included over 200 species. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Human structural frameworks supported Villani harmonic resonance chambers, while Aquatic League biotechnology integrated seamlessly with builder crystal matrices. The result was beautiful, functional, and completely unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. "Final systems check complete," reported Engineer Liu from her console. "Nexus Station is fully operational." Anne smiled as she watched the first civilian transports dock at the station's ports. Families from dozens of worlds were arriving for the dedication ceremony, including many who had never seen their alliance partners in person before. The ceremony began with a simple statement from Brightstar over Water, now the elected speaker. For the Villani people, he had grown into a remarkable leader, combining the natural wisdom of his species with the practical determination he had learned from human teachers. "5 years ago, my people faced extinction," he said, his words translated instantly into hundreds of languages. "We were alone, afraid, and abandoned by those who claimed to represent galactic civilization. Today, we stand together with friends who chose compassion over convenience, cooperation over control." The audience that filled Nexus Station's great assembly hall represented the most diverse gathering in recorded galactic history. Beings who had never spoken to each other before the Alliance now worked as partners on projects that benefited all member species. Ambassador Sterling, now Director General of the Sanctuary Alliance, took the podium next. Age had touched her, hair with silver, but her voice carried the same strength that had once defied the Coalition's abandonment of the Cubs. We gather today not to celebrate victory over our former allies, but to mark the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history. A civilization based not on domination or hierarchy, but on mutual aid and shared growth. She gestured to the viewing ports where dozens of worlds were visible, each one glowing with the lights of thriving communities. The Sanctuary Alliance has grown beyond anything we imagined when we first chose to help the Vellani Cubs. We now include species from every corner of the galaxy, united by a simple principle: no one should suffer alone when help is possible. The achievements Sterling described would have seemed impossible just years before. Alliance worlds had eliminated poverty through resource-sharing programs developed by cooperative economics teams. Diseases that had plagued individual species for millennia were being cured through collaborative medical research. Most remarkably, the Alliance had prevented 3 potential wars through mediation and mutual aid rather than threats and sanctions. But perhaps the most significant change was happening in the youngest generation. Alliance children, regardless of species, were growing up together in integrated communities that produced citizens unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Dr. Patel, now Director of Interspecies Development, presented her latest research to the Assembly. Children raised in Alliance communities show enhanced creativity, superior problem-solving abilities, and unprecedented levels of empathy across species lines. They're not just tolerating differences, they're synthesizing them into entirely new approaches to life and learning. The evidence was visible throughout Alliance space. Young beings who thought in multiple languages, created art that combined traditions from different worlds, and solved technical problems by applying insights from diverse biological and cultural backgrounds. The Dominion's response to Alliance success had been predictably harsh. War Speaker Karath had spent 5 years building a coalition of authoritarian species, determined to crush what they saw as a dangerous precedent. Economic warfare had given way to border skirmishes, which had escalated into open conflicts in disputed systems. But the Alliance's response to Dominion aggression surprised everyone, including their own members. Instead of building larger fleets or developing more powerful weapons, they focused on offering alternatives to Dominion client species. "We don't need to defeat the Dominion militarily," Sterling had explained to the Alliance Security Council. "We just need to prove that our way works better. People will choose freedom over oppression when they have a real choice." The strategy worked beyond all expectations. Dominion client species began requesting Alliance protection in increasing numbers. Entire worlds declared independence and applied for Alliance membership, bringing with them detailed intelligence about Dominion military capabilities and political weaknesses. The beginning of the end for the old order came when the ethereal collective formally reunified under a new consensus that embraced Alliance principles. Their announcement sent shockwaves through what remained of the coalition. "We have rediscovered something our species lost long ago," the collective's new unified voice declared. "The recognition that consciousness is precious regardless of its form, and that wisdom grows through cooperation rather than control." The collective brought with them not just their advanced technology and philosophical insights, but something far more valuable: proof that even the galaxy's oldest civilizations could change when presented with better alternatives. The final crisis came when Dominion forces attempted to blockade Alliance trade routes, cutting off resource flows to newly independent worlds. The blockade was militarily effective, but politically disastrous. Images of Dominion warships preventing medical supplies from reaching refugee planets spread throughout the galaxy, turning even neutral species against the old order. Alliance response was swift, but characteristically unconventional. Instead of attacking the blockading fleets, they organized the largest humanitarian convoy in galactic history. Thousands of civilian vessels from hundreds of worlds converged on the blockade, carrying everything from food to construction materials, to volunteers willing to help besieged populations. War Speaker Karath faced an impossible choice. Attacking civilian vessels would confirm every Alliance criticism of Dominion brutality, but allowing the convoy through would demonstrate that the Alliance could accomplish more with volunteers than the Dominion could with its most advanced military technology. The moment that defined the end of one era and the beginning of another came when Dominion crews began abandoning their own ships to join the humanitarian convoy. Soldiers who had spent their lives enforcing Dominion rule chose instead to carry medical supplies to worlds their government was trying to starve. Within days, the blockade collapsed as entire Dominion fleets switched sides. War Speaker Karath found itself commanding a rapidly shrinking force as species after species chose cooperation over conquest. The final Dominion strongholds fell not to military assault but to simple abandonment. When faced with a choice between serving an empire built on fear or joining a community built on hope, the choice proved remarkably easy for most beings to make. 1 year later, Ambassador Sterling stood again on the observation deck of a human vessel, watching the dedication of the galaxy's first interspecies humanitarian academy. The school would train the next generation of leaders in the principles that had transformed a dying system into the foundation of galactic civilization. Beside her stood Bright Star over water, now a philosopher and engineer whose hybrid solutions to complex problems had become standard throughout Alliance space. His people had not just survived, they had become teachers helping other species learn the value of cooperation. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had listened to the Coalition? Bright Star asked, watching young beings from dozens of species learn together in the Academy's integrated classrooms. Sterling considered the question seriously. Sometimes. But then I remember that the question isn't what would have happened. The question is, what did happen because we chose to act? She gestured toward the academy where human children played games invented by Velani cubs, while young ethereals learned builder construction techniques and aquatic league youngsters taught everyone new forms of music. We saved 176,000 cubs, Sterling continued. But they saved something much larger. They saved the galaxy's capacity for compassion. As if summoned by their conversation, a group of children approached the viewing port. They were a mix of species that would have been impossible to imagine together just a decade before, chattering in a hybrid language that borrowed words from dozens of worlds while creating entirely new concepts that no single species could have developed alone. Look, one young Velani called out, pointing toward a distant star system. That's where the new refugee settlement is going. We're going to help build schools there next month. My grandmother says the refugees are from 7 different species, added a human child with the quick enthusiasm that characterized Alliance youth. She says we'll need to develop new communication protocols, but that's the fun part. Sterling and Bright Star exchanged a look that mixed amazement with deep satisfaction. These children took interspecies cooperation for granted in ways that still surprised adults who remembered the old galaxy. They don't see it as remarkable, Bright Star observed. To them, helping refugees is just what civilized beings do. Maybe that's the real change, Sterling replied. Not just that we help each other, but that we can't imagine not helping each other. A message indicator chimed on her personal communicator, displaying an urgent transmission from the outer rim. Sterling read it quickly, then showed it to Bright Star, with a smile that mixed concern with anticipation. New crisis? He asked. Plague outbreak in the Meridian sector. 3 species affected, approximately 500,000 beings at risk. Local authorities are requesting immediate assistance. Sterling was already activating emergency protocols as she spoke. Throughout Alliance space, humanitarian fleets would be mobilizing within hours. Medical teams, engineers, educators, and volunteers would converge on the crisis zone with resources and expertise that individual species could never have marshaled alone. Some things never change, Bright Star said with a laugh. There's always someone who needs help. And some things change completely, Sterling replied, watching as the Academy's communication center lit up with incoming volunteer applications from young beings throughout the galaxy. Now there's always someone willing to provide it. Their ship turned toward the Meridian sector. Sterling took one last look at the academy where the future was being educated. Children who would never know a galaxy where species abandoned each other to die, who would grow up assuming that cooperation was normal and that helping others was simply what intelligent beings did. The cubs who had once been orphaned and alone were now adults leading the largest humanitarian mission in galactic history. They had not just survived, they had transformed survival itself from a competition into a collaborative art. Behind them, Nexus Station continued its work of coordinating aid missions, cultural exchanges, and collaborative research projects across hundreds of worlds. Ahead of them lay another crisis, another chance to prove that no one had to suffer alone. The galaxy had learned, finally and completely, that some changes once begun could never be reversed, and the universe was better for it.